The shuttle descended through the pale blue clouds of Vulcar Prime, and Danny Cole pressed his face against the window like a child seeing snow for the first time. Below him, the orbital ring of the Valkyrie Imperial Naval Academy stretched across the horizon. It was massive. Thousands of lights blinked along its surface, and warships moved in and out of docking bays like silver fish swimming through dark water. "Stop staring," Lisa Grant said from the seat beside him. "You're making us look like tourists." Danny pulled back from the window and smiled. "We are tourists. We're the first humans to ever set foot in this place." Lisa checked her uniform one more time. The dark blue fabric felt strange against her skin, different from the standard Earthfleet gray she had worn for 5 years. The Valkyrie had insisted that human exchange officers wear their colors. A sign of respect, they said. Danny suspected it was more about marking them as outsiders. The shuttle docked with a soft thump, and the door slid open. A wave of cool air washed over them, carrying a faint smell like copper and flowers. 2 Valkyrie officers waited on the platform. They stood nearly 7 feet tall, with pale gray skin and 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern on their long faces. Their uniforms were white with gold trim, and medals covered their chests. "Welcome to the Imperial Academy," the taller one said. His voice was deep and smooth, translated perfectly by the small device in Danny's ear. "I am Instructor Kellen. I will be your guide during your time here." Danny and Lisa saluted in the human style. Kellen studied the gesture with curiosity, but did not return it. "Follow me," Kellen said. "Your quarters have been prepared." They walked through long corridors made of something that looked like polished bone. Other students passed them, most of them Valkyrie, but Danny spotted a few other species he recognized from Earth's contact files. A group of short, furry Taurani whispered to each other as the humans passed. A tall insectoid Crix clicked its mandibles in what might have been laughter. "They're staring at us," Lisa muttered. "Of course they are," Kellen said without turning around. "Humans are still a novelty in this part of the galaxy. Your species achieved faster than light travel only 50 years ago. Most of the students here come from civilizations that have sailed the stars for thousands of years." Danny felt the sting in those words, but kept his face calm. He had heard this attitude before. To the older species, humans were children playing with toys they did not understand. The exchange program was not about learning from each other. It was about showing the young species how things were really done. Their quarters were small but comfortable. 2 beds, 2 desks, a window that looked out at the stars. Lisa dropped her bag on her bed and sighed. 6 months of this, she said. 6 months to learn everything we can, Danny replied. He was already unpacking his datapad and tools. Earth Command didn't send us here to make friends. They sent us here to understand how the Valkyrie build their ships. The next morning, Danny and Lisa attended their first class. The lecture hall was enormous, shaped like a bowl with hundreds of seats rising toward the ceiling. A holographic projector stood at the center, currently displaying the seal of the Valkyrie Empire. They found seats near the back, away from the other students. Danny noticed that no one sat within 3 rows of them. Whether this was fear or disgust, he could not tell. Instructor Kellen entered the hall, and all conversation stopped. He moved to the projector and touched a control on his wrist. The seal vanished, replaced by a rotating image of a warship. Danny leaned forward in his seat. The ship was beautiful. It stretched nearly 2 kilometers long, with smooth curves and sharp angles that somehow worked together. Weapon ports lined its sides like scales on a snake. The hull shimmered with a faint energy field that Danny recognized as shield generators. "This is the Valkyrie Dreadnought," Kellen announced. "The pride of our fleet. For 3,000 years, this design has protected our empire from all threats. No enemy has ever destroyed one in combat." Murmurs of pride rippled through the alien students. Lisa glanced at Danny and saw him frowning. Today we will study the armor distribution, Kellen continued. He zoomed the hologram to show a cross-section of the hull. Layers of metal and composite materials appeared in different colors. Notice how the thickest armor protects the forward sections and weapon systems. The sides carry medium armor, sufficient to deflect most attacks. The rear sections rely primarily on our shield technology. Danny's frown deepened. He pulled out his datapad and began making notes, his stylus moving quickly across the screen. Kellen spent the next hour explaining the logic behind every design choice. The shields were generated by 12 redundant systems. If one failed, the others would compensate. If 2 failed, the remaining 10 could still maintain 80% coverage. The Valkyrie had calculated every possibility, or so they believed. When the lecture ended, students filed out of the hall. Danny remained in his seat, still staring at his datapad. "What's wrong?" Lisa asked. Danny pointed at the screen. He had drawn a simple diagram of the dreadnought, with a red circle around a section near the rear of the ship. "Look at this area," he said quietly. "Right here, between the reactor housing and the engine mounts. The armor is thin, really thin." Lisa studied the diagram. Kellen said the shields cover that section. "Shields fail," Danny said. "What happens when the shields fail?" Lisa opened her mouth to answer, then stopped. She looked at the diagram again. "That's right next to the main reactor," she whispered. Danny nodded. "One good hit in that spot, and the whole ship goes up. I've seen this before. Earth learned this lesson the hard way, back when we still fought wars on the ocean. Ships sink when designers assume that pumps will never break." Lisa looked around the empty hall. "Are you going to tell them?" Danny stood up and gathered his things. "I'm going to ask Kellen for a meeting. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's something I'm not seeing." But as they walked out of the lecture hall, Danny could not shake the cold feeling in his stomach. He had seen enough human history to know what happened to ships with blind spots. Someone always found them. Instructor Kellen's office was filled with models of warships. They hung from the ceiling, sat on shelves, and covered every flat surface. Some were ancient designs with sharp angles and exposed weapons. Others were sleek and modern, their hulls smooth as glass. Danny recognized the dreadnought among them, a perfect miniature that caught the light as it slowly rotated on its stand. "You wish to see me," Kellen said. He sat behind a desk made of dark wood, his 4 eyes watching Danny with mild curiosity. "I admit, I did not expect a human to seek extra instruction so soon." Danny stood at attention, his hands clasped behind his back. "I have a question about the dreadnought design, instructor." Kellen gestured to a chair. "Sit, ask your question." Danny sat and pulled out his datapad. His heart was beating faster than he wanted to admit. He had spent all night reviewing his notes, hoping to find a mistake in his analysis. He had found none. "During your lecture," Danny began, "you showed us the armor distribution on the dreadnought. The forward sections are heavily protected. The sides have medium armor. But there's a section near the rear, between the reactor housing and the engine mounts, where the armor is very thin." Kellen nodded slowly. "Yes, that section relies on shield coverage rather than physical armor. This reduces weight and improves engine efficiency." "I understand the logic," Danny said carefully. "But what happens if the shields fail?" A flicker of something crossed Kellen's face. Annoyance, perhaps, or the beginning of impatience. "The shields do not fail. We have 12 redundant generator systems. The mathematical probability of total shield failure is less than 1 in 10 million. Danny had expected this answer. He had heard it many times before, in different forms, from different people. Back on Earth, engineers used to say that the Titanic was unsinkable. They used to say that nuclear reactors could never melt down. They used to say that bridges would never collapse. Instructor, Danny said, I mean no disrespect, but I've studied human military history for most of my life. We have a saying on Earth, anything that can go wrong will go wrong. What if an enemy finds a way to disrupt your shields? What if they develop a weapon specifically designed to overload your generators? Kellen leaned back in his chair. His 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign Danny had learned to recognize as deep thought. No enemy has ever developed such a weapon, Kellen said. Has any enemy ever gotten close enough to try? The question hung in the air between them. Kellen did not answer immediately. Danny could see the old instructor thinking, perhaps for the first time in many years, about things he had always taken for granted. I would like to run a simulation, Danny said. With your permission. Just to see what would happen if a precise strike hit that weak point during a shield failure. Kellen was silent for a long moment. Then he stood and walked to the door. Follow me. The simulation center was a vast chamber filled with holographic projectors and control stations. Kellen dismissed the students who were using it and sealed the doors. He moved to the main console and began entering commands. A perfect replica of the dreadnought appeared in the center of the room. It floated in simulated space, surrounded by stars and distant planets. Set your parameters, Kellen said. Danny approached the console. His fingers moved across the controls, setting up the scenario he had imagined. A single enemy fighter, small and fast, approaching from an unexpected angle. Shield generators at 50% capacity due to battle damage. 1 torpedo, aimed precisely at the weak point he had identified. He pressed the button to start the simulation. The enemy fighter appeared on the edge of the display. It weaved through defensive fire, taking hits but continuing forward. The dreadnought's shields flickered as they absorbed the attacks. Then, the fighter launched its torpedo. The small weapon streaked across space. It slipped through a gap in the shield coverage, a gap that existed only because 3 generators were damaged. It struck the hull exactly where Danny had predicted. The explosion was small at first. A burst of fire and debris near the engine section. Then the reactor containment failed. A chain reaction tore through the ship's core. In less than 2 seconds, the mighty dreadnought broke apart, consumed by a ball of white-hot plasma. The simulation ended. The chamber fell silent. Kellen stood frozen at the console. His 4 eyes were wide, and his gray skin had turned a shade paler. 1 torpedo, Danny said quietly. 1 lucky shot in exactly the right place. That's all it would take. Kellen turned to face him. For the first time since Danny had arrived at the academy, the old instructor looked at him not as a primitive newcomer, but as someone who understood something important. How did you see this? Kellen asked. Our finest engineers have studied this design for centuries. How did a human, a member of a species that learned to fly only a few generations ago, see what we could not? Danny thought about the question. He thought about the long history of human warfare, the countless ships that had sunk because of small mistakes. He thought about the submarines lost to single-hull breaches, the aircraft carriers crippled by fires in the hangar bays, the battleships destroyed by explosions in their magazines. Because we've been wrong before, Danny said. Humans have lost so many ships, so many lives, because we assumed we were safe. We learned to question everything. We learned to imagine the worst possible scenario, and then design our ships to survive it. Before Kellen could respond, a chime sounded from the console. An emergency communication, marked with the highest priority codes. Kellen touched the control. A voice filled the chamber, speaking in rapid Valkyrie that the translator struggled to keep up with. A border patrol had been destroyed. 5 ships, gone in minutes. No survivors. The attackers had used an unknown weapon to disrupt shield frequencies, then struck the fleet with precise, devastating accuracy. Sensor data scrolled across the screen. Danny watched it with growing horror. The enemy had targeted the exact weak point. He had just demonstrated. Kelen looked at Danny. His four eyes filled with something Danny had never expected to see from a Valkyrie. Fear. It seems, Kellen said slowly, that someone else has seen what you have seen, and they have already begun to use it against us. Danny felt his stomach drop. He had come to the academy hoping to learn. He had never imagined that his first lesson would be a warning that arrived too late. Somewhere out in the darkness between stars, an enemy was hunting, and they knew exactly where to strike. The war room of Valkyrie High Command was the largest chamber Danny had ever entered. It stretched upward like a cathedral, with holographic displays covering every surface. Maps of star systems rotated in the air. Fleet positions blinked in different colors. Officers moved between stations, their voices low and urgent. Admiral Vareth stood at the center of it all. He was old for a Valkyrie, his gray skin marked with patterns that Danny had learned represented decades of service. His four eyes swept across the room, missing nothing, and when they landed on Danny and Lisa, they turned cold. "These are the humans," Vareth said. It was not a question. Instructor Kellen stepped forward. "Yes, Admiral. Officer Danny Cole and Officer Lisa Grant. They are participants in the exchange program. I know what they are." Vareth walked toward them, his tall frame casting a shadow over the two humans. "What I want to know is how a human knew about the weakness in our ships before we did." Lisa tensed beside Danny. He could feel her anger rising, but he put a hand on her arm to calm her. "I did not know about it, Admiral," Danny said. "I saw it. There's a difference. Explain." Danny took a breath. During Instructor Kellen's lecture, he showed us the armor distribution on the Dreadnought. I noticed that one section was thinner than the others. I asked what would happen if the shields failed, and no one had a good answer. So I ran a simulation. Vareth's eyes narrowed. "And you expect me to believe that this was just observation? That you did not receive intelligence from outside sources?" "Admiral," Lisa said, stepping forward despite Danny's warning look. "Humans had no access to Valkyrie ship designs before the exchange program. We couldn't have known about this weakness because we never saw your ships up close until 3 days ago." "Then how do you explain the timing?" Vareth demanded. "The same day your officer discovers our vulnerability, an enemy uses it to destroy our patrol?" "Coincidence," Danny said. "Or maybe not coincidence. Maybe we both noticed the same thing because it was obvious. Sometimes the biggest flaws are the ones hiding in plain sight." Before Vareth could respond, an intelligence officer approached with a datapad. The Admiral read it, and his expression changed from anger to something darker. "We have identified the attackers," Vareth announced to the room. "The Kreth Dominion." Murmurs rippled through the command staff. Danny caught the name and searched his memory. He had read about the Kreth in Earth's contact files. A warrior species, aggressive and territorial. The Valkyrie had defeated them in a war centuries ago and forced them into a distant corner of the galaxy. "The Kreth were broken," one officer said. "They have no fleet capable of challenging us. They do now." Vareth displayed the intelligence report for all to see. "They have spent the last 200 years rebuilding. They captured Valkyrie ships during the last war and studied them in secret. They found the weakness." The room fell silent. Danny watched the faces of the Valkyrie officers and saw the same expression repeated over and over: shock, disbelief. The foundation of their confidence had cracked. "How many ships share this design flaw?" Vareth asked. "All of them, Admiral." The voice came from a young officer with lighter gray skin. Danny recognized her from the academy. Commander Syra, one of the few Valkyrie who had not looked at the humans with contempt. "Every capital ship in our fleet uses the same basic architecture. The dreadnoughts, the cruisers, the carriers. They all have the same weak point. Vorath closed his eyes. When he opened them again, the anger was gone, replaced by exhaustion. How long to refit the fleet with additional armor? Engineers consulted their datapads. The answer came back. 80 months. Maybe more. We don't have 18 months, Vorath said. The Kreth fleet is already moving toward our space. Our scouts estimate they will reach the border in 6 weeks. Danny felt Lisa's hand on his shoulder. She leaned close and whispered, "Tell them." He hesitated. He was a guest here, a visitor from a young species that the Valkyrie barely respected, who was here to offer advice to an empire that had ruled the stars for 3,000 years. But then he remembered the simulation. The dreadnought breaking apart. The chain reaction consuming everything. If he stayed silent, that simulation would become reality. Not for one ship, but for hundreds. "Admiral Vorath," Danny said. His voice cut through the murmur of the command staff. "I have an idea." Vorath turned to face him. "Speak." "On Earth, we faced a similar problem during one of our wars. We had ships that were vulnerable to a new type of weapon. We didn't have time to rebuild them from scratch, so we developed something called reactive armor. It's a layer of explosive material placed over the hull. When something hits it, the explosion pushes the attack away from the ship." Officers exchanged confused glances. The concept was clearly new to them. "You want to put explosives on the hull?" one asked. "Small explosives," Lisa explained. "Carefully designed to detonate outward, away from the ship. The energy of the incoming weapon is scattered before it can penetrate the weak point." "This seems crude," another officer said. "Our technology is far more advanced than explosive armor." "Crude works," Danny said. "When your fancy shields fail, crude keeps you alive. The reactive armor is simple to manufacture. You could produce enough to cover the weak points on your entire fleet in less than 4 weeks." Vorath studied the two humans. His 4 eyes moved between them, searching for something. "You would share this technology with us?" he asked. "It's not really technology," Danny said. "It's just common sense. Assume your defenses will fail and plan for what comes next." Commander Cyrus stepped forward. "Admiral, I believe we should consider this proposal. The humans have already proven they can see things we cannot. Perhaps their solutions are worth trying as well." Vorath was silent for a long moment. The weight of the Empire seemed to press down on his shoulders. "Begin production of the reactive armor," he said finally. "Retrofit as many ships as possible before the Kreth arrive." Danny felt a wave of relief. It was a small victory, but it was something. Then Vorath turned back to the main display. Red icons marked the advancing Kreth fleet. There were hundreds of them, moving through space like a swarm of angry insects. "The armor will protect our ships," Vorath said, "but it will not win the battle. We are outnumbered 3-1. Danny looked at the display. The numbers were grim. Even with the reactive armor, the Valkyrie fleet would suffer massive losses, unless they fought differently. "Admiral," Danny said slowly, "I might have another idea, but you're not going to like it." Vorath turned to face him again. This time, there was no anger in his eyes, only the desperate hope of a commander running out of options. "Tell me everything," the Admiral said. The command bridge of the Valkyrie flagship was quiet except for the hum of engines and the soft beeping of sensor consoles. Danny stood beside Admiral Vorath, watching the holographic display that showed the positions of both fleets. The Valkyrie ships formed a defensive line near the third planet of the system. Beyond them, still hours away but closing fast, the Kreth Armada moved like a dark cloud across the stars. 12 ships, Vorath said quietly. "That's all we managed to retrofit in time." Danny nodded. 12 ships with the reactive armor protecting their weak points. The rest of the fleet, over 200 vessels, still carried the same vulnerability that had destroyed the border patrol. 12 is enough, Danny said. If we use them correctly. Vorath turned to face him. The old admiral had changed since their first meeting in the war room. The hostility was gone, replaced by something that might have been respect, or might have been simple desperation. Explain your plan again, Vorath said. I want everyone on this bridge to understand what we are about to do. Danny moved to the center of the bridge where the main holographic display floated. He touched the controls, and the image shifted to show a tactical diagram. The Kreth know about the weakness in your ships, Danny began. They've been planning this attack for 200 years. They expect you to fight the way you've always fought. A direct engagement, fleet against fleet, until one side breaks. That is the Valkyrie way, one of the senior officers said. We face our enemies with honor, and they're counting on that, Danny replied. They want you to charge at them. They want a straight fight where they can target your weak points and destroy your ships one by one. Lisa stepped forward to continue. Human history is full of battles where the smaller force won because they refused to fight on the enemy's terms. We hide. We trick. We attack from angles the enemy doesn't expect. You want us to run from the Kreth? The officer's voice dripped with contempt. I want you to make the Kreth think you're running, Danny said. There's a difference. He touched the display again. The tactical diagram changed, showing the Valkyrie fleet splitting into groups. The main fleet engages the Kreth directly, just as they expect. You fight hard, you take losses, and then you retreat. Not in order, but in chaos. Ships scattering in different directions. The Kreth commander will see a broken enemy fleeing for their lives. And then? Vorath asked. Then they chase you. They spread their formation thin, hunting down individual ships. They get confident. They get careless. Danny pointed to a small moon on the display. And that's when the 12 armored ships come out of hiding. The bridge fell silent. Officers exchanged glances, their 4 eyes wide with uncertainty. You want us to hide behind a moon, the senior officer said. Like cowards. Commander Cyrus spoke up from her station. Like hunters. On my homeworld, the greatest predators do not chase their prey in the open. They wait in darkness until a perfect moment. Vorath studied the diagram. His old eyes moved across the tactical projections, calculating distances and timing. If this fails, he said slowly, the Kreth will destroy our entire fleet. If we fight their way, Danny replied, the Kreth will destroy our entire fleet anyway. At least this gives us a chance. The admiral was quiet for a long time. Around him, his officers waited, their faces showing a mixture of fear and doubt. Everything they had been taught, every tradition they held sacred, told them that Danny's plan was wrong, but the numbers told them something else. Without surprise, without trickery, they would lose. We will do it, Vorath said finally. His voice carried across the bridge, silencing all whispers. All ships will follow the human strategy. Commander Syra, you will lead the armored squadron. Stay hidden until you receive my signal. Syra stood straight and saluted. Yes, Admiral. The next 6 hours passed like years. Danny stood at his station, watching the sensor displays as the Kreth fleet drew closer. Lisa worked beside him, coordinating communications between the Valkyrie ships and the hidden squadron Dot, then the Kreth. Arrived Dot, they came out of faster-than-light travel in a wall of metal and fire. Hundreds of warships, their hulls painted black and red, their weapons already charging. The Kreth commander broadcast a message that played across every Valkyrie channel. Your empire ends today. Your ships will burn. Your worlds will kneel before the Dominion. Vorath did not respond. He simply gave the order to engage. The battle began with a storm of energy beams and missiles. Valkyrie ships fired in coordinated volleys, their weapons cutting through the void toward the Kreth formation. The enemy answered with their own fire, and the space between the fleets turned bright with explosions. Danny watched the display with growing dread. The Kreth were targeting the weak points just as he had predicted. Valkyrie ships died in flashes of light as their reactors breached. 3 cruisers gone in the first minutes. Then a carrier. Then 2 more destroyers. "Hold the line," Vorath ordered. His voice was steady, but Danny could see the pain in his eyes. Each lost ship meant hundreds of dead crew members. The battle raged for 20 minutes. The Valkyrie fought bravely, but they were losing. Their formation began to crumble as damaged ships fell back. Then Vorath gave the order. "All ships, retreat. Break formation and scatter." The Valkyrie fleet exploded outward in every direction. Ships fled at maximum speed, some toward nearby planets, others toward the edge of the system. On the sensor display, it looked exactly like panic. The Kreth commander took the bait. "All units pursue," the broadcast captured. "Hunt them down. Leave nothing alive." The Kreth formation spread thin as individual ships chased after fleeing Valkyrie vessels. They swept past asteroids and moons, eager for easy kills. Their discipline broke as each captain competed to destroy the most enemies. Danny watched the display, counting the seconds. The Kreth flagship had moved away from its protective escorts, pushing forward to lead the hunt. "Now," Danny whispered. Lisa transmitted the signal. Behind the small moon, where they had waited for hours, 12 ships powered up their engines. Commander Syra's voice came through the communication system. "Armored squadron engaging. Targeting the enemy flagship." The 12 ships burst from hiding like wolves from the shadows. They fell upon the scattered Kreth with fury, their weapons blazing. The reactive armor on their hulls sparked and flashed as enemy fire struck it, but the ships kept coming. The Kreth flagship turned to face the new threat, but it was too late. Too far from its escorts. Too confident in its victory, Syra's squadron tore through the enemy formation, heading straight for the command vessel. And then the Kreth revealed their final surprise. A pulse of energy erupted from the flagship. It washed across the battlefield in an invisible wave. Valkyrie ships throughout the system reported the same thing. Their shields were failing. The Kreth had deployed some kind of disruption weapon that collapsed shield frequencies across the entire fleet. On the bridge, alarms screamed. Officers shouted reports of shield failure. Danny felt his heart stop. Without shields, every ship was vulnerable. The reactive armor might protect the weak points, but it couldn't cover the entire hull. The Kreth commander laughed across the open channel. "Did you think we didn't know about your tricks? Your shields were always your greatest weakness. Now you have nothing." But Danny was watching Syra's squadron on the display. 12 ships, shields gone, armor exposed. Still fighting. The reactive armor held against the Kreth weapons. Every hit that would have crippled a normal ship was deflected or absorbed. The armored squadron wasn't just surviving, they were winning. "Keep pushing," Danny said into the communication system. "The armor is holding. Get to that flagship." Syra's voice came back, fierce and determined. "We see it. We're almost there." The flagship grew larger on the display. The Kreth commander finally realized his mistake. He had planned for shields. He had planned for Valkyrie tactics. He had never planned for human stubbornness. And now it was too late. The Kreth flagship filled Commander Syra's view screen. A massive vessel bristling with weapons that now fired desperately at her approaching squadron. Energy beams struck her ship's hull, and the reactive armor panels exploded outward, scattering the deadly force away from the vulnerable metal beneath. "All ships, concentrate fire on the enemy bridge," Syra ordered. Her voice was calm despite the chaos around her. The lessons from the human officers had stayed with her. Stay focused. Trust the plan. Simple solutions beat complex ones. 4 ships from her squadron had already fallen, torn apart by the overwhelming firepower of the Kreth fleet. But the remaining 8 pressed forward, their weapons carving burning lines across the flagship's hull. On the main command ship, Danny watched the battle unfold on the holographic display. His hands gripped the edge of his console so hard that his knuckles had turned white. Beside him, Lisa coordinated targeting data, her eyes moving rapidly between multiple screens. "The flagship shields are down," Lisa announced. Their own disruption weapon affected them too. They didn't think this through. Admiral Vorath stood at the center of the bridge, his 4 eyes fixed on the display. Around him, the scattered Velkari fleet had stopped running. Ships were turning back toward the battle, drawn by the impossible sight of 8 small vessels attacking a ship 20 times their size. "The Kreth formation is collapsing," a sensor officer reported. Without orders from the flagship, they're losing coordination. Danny allowed himself a moment of hope. The plan was working. Cyrus' squadron had done what no one thought possible. Then the Kreth flagship fired its main cannon. The weapon was something the Volkari had never seen before. A beam of pure white energy that cut through space like a blade. It struck Cyrus' lead ship directly, and not even the reactive armor could save it. The vessel vanished in a flash of light. 3 ships left, Lisa said quietly. Cyrus' voice came through the communication system, strained but determined. "We can still do this. Target their weapon systems. If we can disable that cannon, the fleet can finish them." The 3 surviving ships split apart, approaching the flagship from different angles. The Kreth gunners tried to track them, but they moved too fast, too unpredictably. Human tactical patterns that the Kreth computers couldn't anticipate. Danny had taught Syra those patterns during the long wait behind the moon. Random movements. Constant changes in speed and direction. Never give the enemy a clean shot. Crude but effective. Syra had said with a hint of a smile. Now, those crude tactics were keeping her alive. The 3 ships converged on the flagship's main weapon array. Their combined fire tore through the armor, protecting the massive cannon. Secondary explosions rippled across the enemy vessel as power systems overloaded. The cannon went dark. "The weapon is destroyed," Lisa reported. "The flagship is vulnerable." Vorath stepped forward. "Signal all ships. Full attack on the enemy command vessel." The Volkari fleet surged back in the battle. Damaged cruisers, limping destroyers, even the smaller frigates that had fled the farthest. They poured fire into the crippled Kreth flagship from every direction. The enemy commander sent one final transmission. "This is not over. The Dominion will return." "We will," his voice cut off as the flagship broke apart. The massive ship crumbled from within, consumed by chain reactions in its power systems. Debris scattered across space, glowing with the heat of destruction. For a moment, silence fell over the battlefield. Then the remaining Kreth ships began to retreat. Without their flagship, without their commander, they had no coordination. They fled in all directions, chased by Velkari vessels hungry for revenge. The battle was over. Danny let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Around him, Velkari officers were cheering, embracing each other in ways he had never seen from the normally reserved species. Vorath turned to face him. The old admiral's expression was difficult to read, a mixture of emotions that Danny couldn't quite identify. "We lost 47 ships," Vorath said. "Merely 8,000 crew members." Danny nodded slowly. Victory always carried a cost. "But we destroyed or captured over 100 enemy vessels," Vorath continued. "The Kreth Dominion's fleet is broken. It will take them another century to rebuild." He walked closer to Danny and Lisa. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, meant only for them. "You saved my people. Both of you. Your simple armor, your strange tactics. They saved us." Your people saved themselves, Danny said. We just showed them a different way to fight. 2 weeks later, the academy looked the same as it had when Danny first arrived, but something had changed. Students no longer avoided the human officers. They approached with questions, with curiosity, with genuine interest in how humans thought about war and engineering. Instructor Kellen had requested a permanent addition to the curriculum. Human military history was now required study for all officer candidates. The ceremony was held in the main lecture hall, the same room where Danny had first noticed the fatal flaw in the Volcari design. Admiral Vorath stood at the podium, addressing a crowd of students, officers, and dignitaries from across the Empire. For 3,000 years, Vorath said, we believed our ships were perfect. We believed our shields would never fail. We believed our enemies could never surprise us. He paused, his 4 eyes sweeping across the audience. We were wrong. He gestured toward Danny and Lisa, who stood at the side of the stage. These 2 humans, members of a species we considered young and primitive, saw what we could not. They asked the questions we were too proud to ask. And when the enemy came, they showed us how to fight in ways we had never imagined. The audience was silent, listening with an attention Danny had never experienced from Volcari before. Today, we formally expand the exchange program. Humans will be granted full partnership status in the Imperial Academy. They will teach alongside our instructors. They will learn from us, and we will learn from them. Applause filled the hall. Not the polite, restrained applause Danny had seen at other ceremonies, but genuine appreciation. After the ceremony, Commander Sierra found Danny standing alone on an observation deck, looking out at the stars. You're leaving tomorrow, she said. Danny nodded. Earth Command wants us back for debriefing, and probably to figure out how to explain what happened here. Syra stood beside him, her tall frame silhouetted against the starfield. I wanted to ask you something before you go. Ask, how did your species learn to question everything? We have lived among the stars for thousands of years, and we never thought to look for weaknesses in our own designs. Humans have been flying for less than a lifetime, and you see flaws everywhere. Danny thought about the question for a long time. He thought about all the disasters in human history, the ships that sank, the planes that crashed, the buildings that collapsed. Every failure taught a lesson. Every tragedy became a warning for the future. We learned because we made mistakes, Danny finally said. So many mistakes. We built things that broke, and people died, and we had to figure out what went wrong. After a while, we stopped assuming anything was perfect. We started looking for problems before they killed us. Syra was quiet, considering his words. Perhaps that is the advantage of being young, she said. You haven't forgotten what failure feels like. Danny smiled. Maybe. Or maybe it's just that we're too stubborn to trust anything we didn't break first. They stood together in silence, watching the distant lights of ships moving through the darkness. The next morning, Danny and Lisa boarded the shuttle that would take them home. As the vessel lifted away from the academy, Danny looked back at the massive ring station one last time. In one of the lecture halls below, a new class was beginning. A human instructor stood beside Instructor Kellen, facing a room full of students from a dozen different species. The first rule of warship design, the human said, is to assume your shields will fail. Now, let's talk about what comes next. The class was quiet.